contentious debate over inheritance tax in India was started when Indian Overseas Congress Chairman Sam Pitroda advocated for a US-style tax policy for inherited family wealth in India. Now, many of you were wanting a separate episode on inheritance tax in India. So here we are. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh and today's topic is the inheritance tax debate in India.
Does that scare the daylights out of you? And is it the end of family businesses, inheritance tax?
About this whole business of inheritance tax and redistribution of wealth, are these sound economic ideas?
The wealth survey and redistribution debate is raging through this whole campaign. Top Gandhi aide Sam Pitroda dropped the inheritance tax bomb.
Now, without beating around the bush, let us try to understand inheritance tax with the help of a simple example. Now, the term inherit means someone acquiring a property, money or resources from a person who has passed away. So, for example, a person inheriting family business from the ancestors. That is what the term inherit means. Now, let's say there is a wealthy person named as Ramesh. Now, let's say Ramesh passes away, leaving 10 crore of his wealth for his only son, that is Rahul. Now suppose after the funeral expenses and after paying off the loans taken by Ramesh, only 5 crore is actually left for Rahul to inherit. So Rahul actually inherits 5 crore rupees from his father. Now let's say government comes into picture. And in order to ensure a level playing field and to reduce the concentration of wealth among few families and also to ensure higher social mobility, government decides to tax this wealth which was inherited by Rahul. Now let's say the government says that 20% of the wealth which Rahul inherited will be taxed, because government gives a rationale that Rahul has not done anything to earn this wealth. Rahul has just acquired this wealth by the virtue of his father passing away. So the government says that we shall as well redistribute this wealth in the society in order to ensure social mobility. Now suppose Rahul has to pay 20% of this 5 crore rupees, that is 1 crore, as tax to the government. Now this tax which the government levies on the inherited wealth of Rahul is nothing but what we call as inheritance tax. So in simple terms, inheritance tax is the tax paid by the individual on the property or assets or money which the person inherits from a deceased person. Now many people use these two terms, that is inheritance tax and estate duty or estate tax, synonymously, but they are not the same. There is one very minute difference between the two. So estate duty or estate tax is basically levied on the whole estate before it is distributed to the beneficiaries. However, inheritance tax is levied on a specific inheritance of a person after the distribution to the beneficiaries has happened. So before the distribution to the beneficiaries, the tax which is levied is estate tax. And after the distribution of estate or after the distribution of the wealth to each beneficiaries, then on individual beneficiary when the tax is levied, that is what we call as inheritance tax. And that is what the minute difference between the two is. Now interestingly, in some places, inheritance tax is also known as nepotism tax or death tax. Now in the entire world, there are a lot of debates and controversies surrounding this inheritance tax. Now throughout the world, we saw the upsurge of imposition of inheritance tax in the whole 19th and 20th century. But from 1960 onwards, we saw a lot of states or a lot of countries taking back this inheritance tax and pulling back from this inheritance tax regime. Now let us come to the example of India. So the question is, did India ever have any tax like the inheritance tax or not? The answer is yes. So in 1953, Estate Duty Act came into force in India, and thus the concept of inheritance tax was also introduced in India. Now, as you know, from 1947 to 1991, before the LPG reforms came into play, we were following a mixed economic model with a socialist tilt.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, make any sacrifice to realize those dreams. सरफरोशी की तमन्ना अब हमारे दिल में है, देखना है जोर कितना बाजुए बातिल में है.
So at that point of time, the motive of the government of India was to reduce the wealth inequality and reduce concentration of wealth in few hands, and to ensure greater social mobility and also to ensure greater social equality For that, this inheritance tax was imposed by the government. Now the tax ranged from single digit, that is 7 to 8%, to also the tune of 85% on certain estates. Of course, it was very unpopular among the people, and many people devised a lot of ways and strategies to basically evade this tax. So tax evasion of inheritance tax in our country was very, very high. Now this tax remained in place for 32 years, but was not able to reduce the wealth inequality and concentration of wealth in our country. Hence, it was repealed in 1985. Now, some other reasons for the repeal included procedural harassment, high cost of collection, and also frequent tax evasions by the people. So, the collection of the tax was very, very low, and the revenue generated from the inheritance tax also remained abysmally low. So, rather than helping the cause of the government and fueling the resources of the government, basically it became a financial burden on the government. And hence its repeal was very, very necessary. Now, somewhat similar to inheritance tax, there was a tax named as wealth tax, which was imposed or introduced 4 years after this inheritance tax. So in 1957, a tax named as wealth tax also got introduced. Now this tax was imposed on high net worth individuals, and it was imposed on individuals, Hindu undivided families, or companies whose net worth crossed 30 lakh mark. Now this tax was also discontinued in 2016, and the reasons were somewhat similar to what we saw in the case of inheritance tax. Now, since we have a fair bit of understanding about the working and the history of inheritance tax, let us delve into the debate surrounding this inheritance tax. Now, the opinions on this tax are heavily divided and polarized, with both the sides having specific reasons to support their own stand. Now, the most pressing reason because of which people propagate imposition of inheritance tax in India is the high level of inequality existing in our society in relation to wealth, income, and resources. Now, as per the report published by Oxfam International, the top 10% of our population accounts or holds more than 77% of our total national wealth, which shows that inequality in relation to wealth and income in our country is extremely high. So many experts believe that imposition of inheritance tax in India might help in reducing this glaring inequalities which exist in our society. Also, many people believe that imposition of this inheritance tax might boost the government revenues to a very high level and also help in reducing the fiscal deficit levels in our country. Now, additional to this, promotion of economic mobility and a reduction of concentration and accumulation of wealth in few hands are also some of the reasons because of which people support the imposition of this inheritance tax. Although those who criticize the idea of inheritance tax, they also have very pressing reasons to do so. Now, considering the corporate and personal income tax, including the capital gains tax in the direct side and GST in the indirect side, in the last few years, there have been a surge in the tax collections. And there is not a very pressing need to introduce any new tax regime to boost our taxation revenues. Also, inheritance tax, if introduced, will have severe and important implications for the family-owned businesses in our country. And also, it will hit the middle class the most, because high-income people will definitely be able to evade these kind of taxes, and again the brunt of these taxes would be borne by the middle class of our country. Also, family-owned businesses might relocate their businesses, assets and wealth to tax havens or friendly countries, for example UAE, Singapore, Ireland, Cayman Islands, and many other tax havens as well. Now, this would lead to outflow of wealth from our country and would be a kind of punishment for the wealth creators in our country. And in long run, it can be very detrimental for the economic landscape and wealth creation in our country. This could even send a wrong signal to the foreign investors and might also reduce the inflow of foreign investments, FDIs, FIIs, and FPIs into our country, which will again hit our economic growth and economic performance in a very, very bad way. Also, in India, with the population of 1.4 billion people, only 2.24 crore people paid income tax in 2023. which is just 1.6% of our total population. And this makes us conclude that even inheritance tax won't be paid by a lot of people, so it won't make much difference to the government exchequer or the government treasury. Also, the administrative cost for collection of these taxes might outweigh the actual tax revenue which will be generated by the government. So again, it might become a burden for the government as to what we saw in 1960s and 70s. Hence, many experts say that imposition of inheritance tax in India is not very economically feasible for our country and would be detrimental for the overall economic health of India. Now, there are several countries in the world which do have an inheritance tax regime into play. For example, US. Now, in US, some states like Iowa, Kentucky, Nebraska, New Jersey are having the laws related to inheritance tax. Now, in France, the inheritance tax rates vary from 5 to 60%. In Belgium, it is as high as 80%. In South Korea, it is 50%, and several other countries like UK, Singapore, Germany, etc. also have some sort of inheritance tax regime into play. Now, in contrast, countries like Australia, China, Canada, India, and several other developing nations, they don't have any concept of inheritance tax which is currently going on. So there are both sides to the coin. Some countries, they have an inheritance tax regime into play, and some countries, they don't have imposition of inheritance tax in their country. So we can't say that inheritance tax imposition is right only or it is wrong only, because both the cases can be seen in the entire world. Now, since we know both of the sides of the coin, now it is for you to decide that whether we as a country should have inheritance tax regime or not, or whether imposition of inheritance tax in India is a right decision or a wrong decision. Now, do let me know your views in the comment section, and feel free to give your suggestion as to what all topics we can cover in the upcoming videos. I hope you gained some new perspective from this session. All the very best and have a nice day.